Welcome back to another episode of the Gridiron, guys. And today we are going to be starting our first hot take of the year. And that hot take is Calvin Ridley is this year's Chris Godwin. And I know it sounds outlandish when you first hear it, but I'm gonna run by some numbers and stats and show you why I really think Calvin Ridley can even outpace Julio Jones for this upcoming season. So the Atlanta Falcons last year, they lost Mohamed Sanu, or they traded Mohamed Sanu. They let Austin Hooper walk. They did not re-sign Devonta Freeman, who catches a lot of passes out the backfield. 258 vacated targets, which is the most in the league. 258 vacated targets. It's a crazy high number. And Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones are still sitting there, being that 1-2 punch they've been, and those targets are going to be largely redistributed to them and to the new addition of Hayden Hurst. And I understand people are like, oh, Hayden Hurst will take the Austin Hooper workload. Hayden Hurst has never had an NFL workload. He's had basically no production with Baltimore. It was just a signing or a trade of fully off potential, expecting Hayden Hurst to be that breakout player. I do not expect Hayden Hurst to fill that target void by Austin Hooper. I expect some of that to go to Ridley and Julio, along with the news targets. I expect some of it to go to Ridley and Julio. And you may think, oh, Calvin Ridley had to have a lot of targets last year. He's just not a big yardage guy for the total year. Calvin Ridley has never eclipsed 100 targets in a year. He's only had 93 targets as a rookie and 92 targets last year. To put that in perspective, the top 10 wide receivers on average 129 targets. And that was taking from last year's top 10 fantasy wide receivers. The average targets they saw were 129 targets, which is 37 more targets than Ridley saw last year. And let's say Ridley sees an uptick of 25% in his target share. 25%, taking some of those 258 to get to 115 targets, which is a modest number. So he gets 115 targets. We uptick his with his opportunity by 25%, and then I'm going to uptick his points by 25%. So if he had a 25% uptick in production because we saw 25% more targets, he would have finished with 206.8 fantasy points in half-point PPR, which would have him finish as the wide receiver 10 in half-point PPR for last year. Say you give Calvin Ridley the average workload of a top 10 wide receiver last year, 129 targets, which is the average. So if he gets a top 10 workload and you take his production from last year, and his production from last year wasn't anything crazy, it was very similar to his rookie seasons, we take the 129 targets and we put Calvin Ridley's production for what he would have had with 129 targets. In half-point PPR, he would have finished with 231 points, wide receiver 3, above Julio Jones, only behind Michael Thomas and Chris Godwin. And I understand you can't project the breakout, but because you never know what's going to happen. But Ridley is a guy who was drafted as a first-round pick. He was drafted as the ultimate successor to Julio Jones. I mean, Julio's already in his 30s. Ridley's, I think, 23, 24. It's his third year in the league. They expect him to be a wide receiver 1. And I think that's why they had so much confidence in letting guys like Mohamed Sanu, Austin Hooper walk out the door, because they expect Calvin Ridley to take that next jump this year. And quickly, I'm going to go to Calvin Ridley's last year's 2019 stats just to show you that he had a pretty good year. And right now, I think you're drafting him at his floor. Last year, he played 13 games, got 93 targets for 866 yards and 7 touchdowns. Finished as the wide receiver 25 in half-point PPR. Rookie year, 92 targets, 821 yards, 10 touchdowns. And the touchdown numbers are there, which is really good to see for Ridley, because that is a key factor in being able to finish as a top 10 wide receiver. You got to score 10-plus touchdowns usually. And with Julio not being able to score, who knows what Todd Gurley's going to bring? They lost Austin Hooper, who took a lot of those touchdowns last year. I think Ridley should even see more scoring opportunities than he did last year. I expect the Falcons offense to not take a step behind. They have a great offensive line. They have a great QB. And those 800 yards that Ridley's had in his last 2 years, that number is going to go up a lot this year. I think we just haven't seen his full potential. 92 targets, it's not a lot of targets. I mean, that number is going to get shattered this year. 92, 93 targets, going to get shattered. And, all right, you may think Ridley's not going to outpace Julio Jones. I understand that. I'm not guaranteeing he does, but I think the likelihood that Ridley paces or outscores Julio Jones this year is pretty high. And I'm not saying he has to do that. Right now, Ridley is being drafted as an ADP of 44.5 point PPR. That is him being drafted at his floor. That is him being drafted with his production from the last 2 years when he only received 92 and 93 targets. Last year, he finished as a wide receiver 25. Basically, a wide receiver 2 for the year, missing 3 total games. I mean, that ADP right now is a steal. You're getting a player who has top 5 potential with a floor of 800 yards and 8 touchdowns around. That's just crazy to me. I mean, Chris Godwin, the comparison is so easy, it just feels wrong. Godwin played with a lot of talented players over the first 2 years, with Mike Evans. Austin Humphries was there, got a lot of targets. O.J. Howard. They've had a lot of guys around him. Then year 3, Winston finally has a great year for fantasy terms. He puts up a lot of yards and a lot of touchdowns. Godwin sees that uptick in opportunity that I expect Ridley to see this year. And the talent was always there for Godwin. He was a high draft pick, I believe 3rd round or 2nd round out of Penn State. We saw he had potential. He gets that uptick in target share, and his production follows because he's always been that guy. Ridley's a 1st round pick with high pedigree over his career. 3rd year, I expect the same exact thing from him. Matt Ryan has not shown that he's going to slow down, and I just think Calvin Ridley, it's your year to do this. Quickly, I'm going to pull up Chris Godwin's stats from the first 2 years to parallel to Ridley's to show that this jump in production and targets is definitely capable of happening. So, in 2018, Chris Godwin's 2nd season, he saw 95 targets compared to Ridley's 93. 842 yards, which was around Ridley's 880, and 7 touchdowns, which was similar to Ridley's 8 touchdowns. Then, the following year, Godwin saw 26 more targets, essentially a 25% bump in opportunity. His yards went from 842 to 1,333 and 9 touchdowns, 2 touchdowns up from the year prior, and that was only in 14 games. That just shows you that opportunity for a wide receiver is everything. The targets is everything. The yards per reception for both these guys are great. 12, 13, 14 is what Ridley and Godwin have been in. And I expect the opportunity and production to parallel and just shoot to the moon. I will go out on a limb and say, I won't say Calvin Ridley will outpace Julio because Julio is that consistent wide receiver 1 every year, but I will say Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones both finish as top 10 wide receivers in fantasy football this year. And I don't even consider that much of a hot take. I think Ridley's this year's breakout star, and I think he's a league winner. He's a guy that in every 4th to 5th round of drafts, I am looking to draft him because I have full faith in Calvin Ridley this year. Because at the very least, you're getting a solid wide receiver too. You're drafting him at his floor. I can't say that enough. And that's why I love Calvin Ridley this year. And that is my first breakout take, hot take of the year. I'm going to be getting a lot more into these. You can also, I guess, call these guys my guys that I'd just be targeting in all my leagues. And I will be putting out another one of these every week just to show you the 5 or 6 guys that I think are going to be league winners this coming season. So that concludes the video. Make sure to like and subscribe and check out our Instagram at Gridiron_guys_YT on Instagram.